championships recently by Just Stop Oil, Extinction Rebellion and other climate activist groups have vowed more protests unless the government meets their demands. They've said that unless there's an end to all funding for new fossil fuel projects, they'll step up their campaigns, which will include more civil disobedience. I'm joined now by Claire Farrell, the co-founder of Extinction Rebellion. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks.
I guess my first question, I know it was by Just Stop Oil, not by Extinction Rebellion, but when you see disruptive protests like that at the snooker, do you applaud those? Do you celebrate those?
Yes, of course, because they really bring the urgency to light, don't they? And Just Stop Oil in particular, as a part of our sort of ecosystem of movements who are desperately trying to get the appropriate action to slow down or avert civilizational collapse, which is what we're on course for. Those actions obviously bring an immediacy, an urgency, and a critical, loud voice of young people to the conversation, which is what needs to be crucially heard.
I wonder if you celebrate as loudly for what is a disruptive protest as perhaps you would have done, say, 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and whether part of what those tactics, I presume, are aimed at doing, you feel has been achieved in terms of whether you feel that this nation as a whole is not one of climate deniers, but where the majority of people do accept that climate change is very real.
Yeah, I mean, it depends which news channel you watch, doesn't it? Because I know a lot of people in our circles who go on various different types of channels where you meet an alarming level of ignorance and in some cases denial. But obviously on Sky, on lots of other mainstream channels, there is a widespread understanding of what's going on. But there is not a widespread critique of the fact that the government are actively making it worse, actively trying to open new oil and gas against the advice of pretty much every well-informed person on the face of the planet. And not to mention the fact that this government are squandering the goodwill of the public because they are really well informed, the British public. They do want to see action on climate, and the government are letting us down, the same as they're letting us down with, stagnating and dropping wages, the same as striking workers and people who can't afford to pay their bills. So, we're trying to pull together a group of people, not only to say we have to end the fossil fuel era, but also we have to find a better way of doing our governance of our nation, because they're failing us on multiple levels and showing again and again the cronyism, the corruption, and the inability and the lack of creativity and the inability for them to understand even the science, but definitely not capable of making a serious plan to deal with the climate crisis. And we're not prepared for the impacts that are coming. They've been well predicted. We understand this for a long time now. And we're not doing the appropriate things to shut down the fossil fuel sector. So people are coming together and saying, well, hey, actually, there's a more sensible way that we could make decisions. And that means you get ordinary citizens a seat at the table and they understand the real world and real people's lives far better.
But I mean, not that many people are coming together relative to the size of the population. I'm really interested in the phrase you used just there. You said the government was squandering the goodwill of the people. What would you say to someone that would say, the tactics that you guys use, which aren't really focused at disrupting the government, who it sounds like you blame, they're targeted at disrupting the lives of everyday people. Are you squandering the goodwill of the people who, over the last couple of decades, maybe 2 decades ago, even a decade ago, I totally get your argument that there were a lot of climate deniers or that people weren't fully educated as to the risk of climate change, but are you risking turning people against your cause, who the majority of the country probably are at the moment in favour of it, but perhaps not supportive of some of your tactics?
Well, let's be clear, 10, 15, 20 years ago, the reason why people weren't advocating for rapid action on climate was because there was the most successful, well-funded, and poisonous and disgusting campaign of mis and disinformation coming from the fossil fuel industry, which was facilitated by people in government and in the media in order to confuse people and delay their desire and their demand for action. What we've got in the UK is one of the highest understandings in Europe of the seriousness and the severity of the crisis, and really a massive desire for rapid action on the climate. So, we know that these kinds of actions have kept this on the political agenda. I've been told by people like you who work in the mainstream media in the past few years, thank you for helping us to keep it up the agenda, because it struggles to stay newsworthy. We struggle to keep this conversation alive. We've got a climate emergency declaration, we've got a net zero target that's inadequate, we're not even on course to meet it. Young people who are alive today, I think even me and most people watching this are going to live through civilizational collapse if we don't do something very serious about this and get ready for the changes that are already happening, which are catastrophic, are hitting the people who deserve it the least, who caused it the least, and we'll continue to see that injustice play out through the crisis. So, no, I don't think we're squandering anything. I think the problem here is one of recognising the failure of our governance systems to be able to keep us safe, to be able to face the problems that we have in the 21st century. It's out of date, really, our system. It needs upgrading. We need to introduce different people into the conversation who are capable of looking at this problem with fresh eyes and say, what should we be doing? And the first thing you would do, even a 6-year-old would tell you, stop investing in new oil and gas, stop new licenses. You have to cut it off. That's what's causing the problem.
Right, but obviously that can't necessarily happen overnight. We could debate that for a while. But I'm interested in terms of your point there, just in terms of you need new governance structures. Obviously, we live in a democracy. There is a constitutional process if you want constitutional reform. And I get that the bar to reach that is high. And your protests are, I guess, a way, not round democracy, but to draw attention to your issue. I get that. One of your demands on your website, your third key demand, says we demand a culture of participation, fairness and transparency. The government must create and be led by a citizens' assembly on climate and ecological justice. Only the common sense of ordinary people will help us navigate the challenging decisions ahead. I guess my question with that in mind, and it links back to what you were just saying, is what if in 5 years' time, a decent amount of time, even 10 years' time, you're still not getting to the point you want? Would it be plausible to you that you don't in fact represent the common sense of ordinary people and that you drop your cause if you hadn't successfully brought people along with you by that point or after a certain amount of time?
Well, that's precisely, I'm glad you've said that, because Extinction Rebellion, I think, has not managed to really land this as well with the public as we would have liked to have done. The call for citizens' assemblies is a call for a stratified lottery process to select random citizens, a bit like a jury, to come together and sit and deliberate with all the best possible information to get fully educated on 360 degrees of an issue and then to deliberate on what to do. So we don't want anyone to ask...
How many years you want to disrupt the snooker or disrupt...
Well, we didn't disrupt the snooker, did we? We've been trying to put out our stall as convening an enormous group of people to come together and say, can things be done differently? Because we're actually on course for breakdown and collapse, and nobody's making the appropriate legislation, regulation. The crackdown on disruptive protests has been far quicker and more effective, hasn't it, than the crackdown that we would make on carbon emissions, which are what is actually going to kill everybody on Earth. So, it's not my opinion that matters. It's the fact that we've always been advocating for groups of citizens that are representative of the public, like mini publics, to sit and say, what would be the best way forwards? And these are not radical concepts. Citizens' assemblies are a very moderate and reasonable political solution. It's a piece of democratic innovation. It's what I would call something that you would do for democratic renovation. You look at the state of our politics, look at the corruption during COVID, look at the problems that people have in a lack of trust in our politicians. And then this is about social cohesion. This is about people coming up with solutions that are just, that are fair, that are inclusive, and that have everyone's best interests at heart. So, there's nothing really that radical about what we're asking for. It's actually extremely reasonable. So I'd urge everybody to go and look into deliberative democracy and participatory democratic ideas, because there's a wave of innovation around how to enhance our democracy. It's been sweeping Europe and the rest of the world over the last few years, and people should have a look at it, because our politics is failing an awful lot of people in this country, don't you think?
I definitely don't think it's perfect, but democracy does exist, and the voting system exists, so you have to win votes to change things, I guess. But that is, I guess, a debate for another time, Claire, and I hope you'll come back and we can have that, because I've enjoyed this. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks.